Welcome to what high performing association boards do differently. We want to highlight our content from McKinley, and we'll talk more about what all we're going to cover in just a second. But know that we're going to regularly invite you into this conversation. So this is not a talk at you; it's a engage with you webinar. So bring your thoughts, your questions, your situations. We will look forward to those along the way. In terms of who we are, let's start with some brief introductions. Oops. Uh, my name is John Hockman, and I'm a Chief Practice Officer with McKinley. Among other things, I lead our governance practice area and have been doing this work for 35 years. So have seen a few situations, and there's that old adage, if you've seen one association, you've seen one association, and that's probably particularly true around governance. And there are some research different truths and some experiences that we definitely see as patterns, and we'll be able to talk about those today. And so looking forward to bringing that background to the conversation in partnership with Mina Dayak. Mina?
Good to be with you all today. I'm Meena Dayak, practice director at McKinley, and work with John and with my other colleagues on the team on a number of governance projects. And I especially work with many healthcare organizations and help them resolve or evolve complex situations with their boards to really modernize governance and help it align with association strategies. So I am excited to talk with you about some of what we've seen working and the hurdles that we can overcome as we discuss this together.
Great. So that's us. Now we'd like to ask a little bit about you. If you would put in the chat, what are you hoping to gain from today's session? What has drawn you in, whether you are on the staff side of the equation or a volunteer leader in your organization? We'd love to get a sense. And so if you'd put that in the webinar chat, um, we'll see that pop up here, and we'll just get a sense from what's on your mind. Don't be shy. How to get Jennifer, how to engage the board meaningfully in our work. And I think meaningfully probably is a key word there. Certainly looking to get broader perspectives, how others probably are challenging things, uh, ideas on how to engage the board on the importance. Um, a board of 30, so definitely seeing different realities there. Um, Constant improvement. Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate that. Best practices and what others are doing. So we're certainly prepared to cover that. Keep them coming in, and we will do our best to hit those marks all the way through. We have, of course, prepared content that I think is going to hit these things, but let me just um, be very clear. What we're hoping you'll gain today is what high performing boards do differently, because not all boards are high performing, unfortunately. So, what's the distinction or drivers there? Um, how boards influence the pace of change and the core strengths required to lead confidently through times of um, big change. And I think that certainly describes the moment we find ourselves in today. Understand what CEOs have identified as most critical to board success. We've done some extensive research there and continue to pay attention to the market to make sure we're getting all those ideas out of leaders. So we'll touch on that. And last but not least, what are strategies to build high performing boards? Even if you feel that your board has been effective to this point, as challenges evolve and the climate evolves, how do we continue to make sure boards are meeting the moment with their leadership and where the organization needs to go? So great input. That's where we want to go. And so let me get on with some of that content. Um, just what do high performing boards do differently? And again, this is based on research that McKinley has done. As I think many of you will know, McKinley has been around for decades working with association boards of all types. And so we pull forward that wisdom as well as recent research to inform what we're bringing to you today. So, next level governance, you will hear that phrase repeatedly from us because that's the moniker we've put on our work. But what do we really hear there about what high performing boards do differently? We've got a list of bullets here, and we will, over the course of our time together with you today, unpack these in more specificity. But that anticipation of emerging trends and challenges, certainly everyone here is probably familiar with ASAE and that foresight orientation. That is the label they use. We would just talk about what are boards doing to look ahead around corners, if you will, certainly guide long-term strategy. And that sounds simplistic, but it's actually more challenging than many people would know, including what does long-term mean in this day and age? One of the things we see shifting is sort of the horizon timeline that boards are spending more of their time on. There was one point in time where a 10-year plan was a norm, certainly not the norm today. Even 5-year plans are pretty rare today, increasingly looking at 2 to 3 year plans. So, what does long term mean in terms of building strategy? Um, Really fostering internal debate, meaningful debate. This is an area where most association boards are pretty challenged. Certainly, they'll have some disagreement, but really the rigor of great debate can be more rare than it ought to be along the way. How do organizational leaders and boards in particular remain open to change? Gosh, there's a whole lot of I've done it this way, we've done it this way. That is a part of governance, and we always want to be careful around that going forward. Prepare to take on informed risks. Key there, both informed and risks. Yes, risk is an appropriate thing for boards, and gauging risk appetite, understanding the real depth of what's a risk is the informed part. And so that's got to be a key part of what boards are doing today. And last but not least is making sure the governance system. So that's all the other parts around the board. Some groups have a house of delegates or an assembly, certainly committees and task forces, and all the other ways we organize to get things done in the organization. Is that governance ecosystem? And is it really meeting the moment in whole or in part? And if not, what's to be done there? Um, I just want to turn to you. Anything you want to comment on around these before we get into more specificity?
I think you covered it, John, and we'll just unpack. I know from the comments in the chat that you all might be in a slightly different place, but ultimately this comes down to who is on the board, how you're functioning, and what is the sort of scope, defined scope, and the adopted scope of what the board is doing. What do you see as your charge? None of this is easy, but it's kind of easy to pack bullets on a slide in a webinar, but I think it starts with intentionality about if we want to take the next step, if we want to go from good to great, here are the things we need to prioritize.
Absolutely. We got to name it before we can deal with it. And so that's an important piece of the puzzle. Um, Next, we want to talk about a metaphor that we use quite often. And those of you who are on the webinar, worked with McKinley, you will probably recognize this right away, the bicycle metaphor. And if you think of a bicycle and its mechanics, the front wheel is where you steer, and that sets direction. The back wheel is where the chain connects and powers things forward. And so the comparison here is the board of directors is responsible for the front wheel types of activities, mission, vision, strategy, um, setting direction for the organization, pointing we need to go in a particular direction. The back wheel is the equivalent of where professional staff and all the other way member volunteers are organized. Again, committees, task forces, work groups, whatever the nomenclature is in your organization that power the work forward. And in a bicycle, they're co-equal. They both are critical roles. They're just different. And to the comments from the chat around getting in the weeds, we all have dealt with volunteer leaders who um, get into back wheel mode, as we like to say. And that's not surprising. And it's not a judgment, given that almost all board members get there through some history of back wheel work, service to the organization in lots of different ways, where they have demonstrated their knowledge and their talent and their capabilities, and that makes them eligible for consideration, either technically or implicitly, for board service. But what we fail to realize is the front wheel work is quite different. It's a very different job. And have we really prepared people through their leadership journeys to do what their task is of direction setting, not operationalizing? So it's a simplistic metaphor. It's not perfect. People often ask about the CEO. If we want to sort of torture it, the CEO is the frame of the bike, because that role, chief staff officer, does bridge between those two worlds and carries that forward. We also know that in some organizations, frankly, particularly smaller ones, that there's a quote unquote working board. The board is a doing board in some ways. That's not wrong. It is, however, a combination of two different roles, and important to say when are we as this working board in back wheel mode, because there's some worker bee things to advance, and when does the board need to be in front wheel mode, and be clear about the difference. They are different. Ideally, a board is able to just focus on front wheel work, but if not, we want to acknowledge that that's part of the reality there. So people don't always remember my name, but they always remember the bicycle metaphor. And hopefully it's helpful to use throughout this kind of conversation. And as you think about how do you get the right people on the board, to one of the points I raised before, with the right skill set, the knowledge, skills, and experiences to do the front wheel job, as well as the back wheel job. So I'm just glancing at comments here. Mina, anything coming forward that I need to?
Lots of bicycle fans, and we are also having a little discussion here in the chat about how do you measure the impact of a high-performing board, which I think we'll come to shortly.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge on the bicycle slide, I didn't talk about that last bullet on the front wheel, evaluation. And it becomes a conversation point very frequently, because there's a difference in evaluation of front wheel progress, board level strategic progress, is distinct from back wheel measurement of operational performance, managerial performance. They're different kinds of evaluation and measurement of performance. They're both important, but what the board needs to know to ensure that directionally the organization is moving where they want it to move is almost always a different data set, qualitative or quantitative, than a staff team or others need to operationalize and manage activity through the back wheel work. And when those get conflated or commingled, it can create real confusion, and it invites people into the weeds, or they feel like it's inviting them into the weeds. So I was just on a call today with a board leader around this issue. Getting clear on what the board wants to see for performance is a different deal.
Yeah. And John, I will state the obvious and tie it back to the second bullet under the front wheel. Ultimately, it's about tying it back to strategy in terms of impact and measurement and evaluation. If your strategy is bold and it calls for you to go forward, and that's the strategy the board has agreed to, then there can definitely be metrics attached to that strategy, and the board can stay at that level to ensure that the organization is high performing.
Yep. Yep. Okay. What boards say they need? Again, based on our research and our experience, three key things here. Boards say they need protected time for generative, future-focused discussions. It can be really easy to compromise on that in the moment. So protected time, key there to have generative conversation. Two, deliberate, uh, deliberate strategic recruitment and engagement. We need a variety of perspectives and backgrounds and knowledge, skills, and experiences as a part of the board. So being intentional about getting the right people in the room with the right mix of identities and experiences is really important. So we'll speak more on that in a moment. Uh, and third, targeted board training and pipeline development. What are you doing intentionally, proactively to ensure you have a pool of talent that is ready to do the job that the organization needs of those leaders at this moment in time and going forward? So the pipeline development piece, there's certainly some success stories about cultivating leaders for the future, but far more often what we hear is we don't have the right people, and so we end up with um, sort of longevity and or popularity driving who ends up at the board table, as opposed to who has the knowledge, skills, and experiences to do the job at hand. And certainly building that talent before they get to the board table is ideal and important. And even when they get to the board table, developing and training and supporting people. And this can be difficult. I want to acknowledge, and particularly for the volunteer leaders here, I don't want you to take offense, but there can be an attitude of, are you suggesting I'm not competent or I'm not prepared for the job? No, that is not the message at all. The message is the organization and what it needs from its board is specific and different than other contexts where most people have been leaders. And so we need to acknowledge that there's some development and growth that will help the organization be better and help those directors be better in the job at hand. So I want to acknowledge that as a key piece of the puzzle. I'm going to keep going. We want to do a quick poll because I've been talking at you when I hear from you. So a colleague going to pop up a poll here around where do you see your board needing to strengthen? So hopefully you've just seen a pop-up window on your screen with those choices in there, and click those that apply for you. We'll see what the results are. We'll give you a moment to weigh in. It's that awkward pause while letting you do what you need to do, but not wanting too much dead air time. Okay, there we go. There's our results. So anticipate emerging trends and challenges, 45% of you. Guiding long-term strategy, 55% is an area of growth. And then if I'm doing quick math, prepare to take on informed risks is the third highest uh, across these voting patterns. So um, interesting. You never quite know where the data is going to come in, but tried and true issues that we can unpack a bit more. I always think it's interesting when we describe the bicycle metaphor and uh, what is required of the board, setting direction, setting strategy. is is the headline there. And even with that, we've got over half the folks who are here with us saying we've got an opportunity to be better at setting long-term strategy. So it remains a challenging piece of the puzzle. Um, and that you are not outliers. That we hear that all the time. Okay. Thank you for that input and engagement. And if questions come up at any time or comments on that or anything that I'm saying, please keep adding to the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on it, but I know Mina's keeping a focused eye on it. Okay, so core strengths required to lead confidently, and again, we want to go to the research here. And in our work, primarily with CEOs on this question, there are four key things that come up. The presence of respect, candor, and trust, a diversity of leadership, uh, the courage to change, and embracing a dynamic learning environment. And we're going to unpack each of these in more detail here in a moment. Um, but those are the headlines there. And so when we unpack them more deeply, in terms of respect, candor, and trust, um, we very frequently see ample respect in a board. That people tend to respect their fellow directors on the board, and that's great. We see it's sort of a mixed bag on trust, and there are probably a host of reasons for that. Um, Not the least of which is most boards don't actually get a ton of time together, either in person or virtually, to really get to know each other and sort of understand where they're coming from. And so intentionally addressing trust building is key. And the third leg of this stool around candor is the one that we find most challenging with association boards, that insufficient willingness to say the thing, as we like to frame it at McKinley, but the tough conversations, the provocative ideas, the take on the we've always done it this way, the willingness to, well, what if we sort of frame questions along those lines? All that's about candor. And if boards aren't able to get to deep candor with one another, it is our opinion that there's less likelihood that they're going to get to the best outcomes, the best decisions. So the combination of the three-legged stool around respect, candor, and trust is really essential in the research. And not all of those show up as easily or naturally. And so how can you, as either the staff side or the board side, be really intentional about fostering the depth of respect, trust, and candor that's needed for the board to optimize performance? In terms of diverse leadership, I mentioned earlier that the research shows the criticality of having a diversity of backgrounds. Obviously, the word diverse in our current climate is charged, and many organizations have moved away from that particular word or associated words, and that's fine. The research still stands up in that having people with a variety of backgrounds, knowledge, skills, experiences through their lived experiences, their personal identities, their work and volunteer capacity, all that contributes to having the breadth and variety of lenses that are going to help the board see things from the angles needed to get, again, best decision making to happen. So clear and strong evidence around this one. And we, even though we're in an environment where certain words are charged and there's certain reasons why folks need to be very careful, we want to underscore the criticality of getting the right people at the board table. It is about intentionally working to get people with a variety of backgrounds. And I want to stress here, and we'll probably touch a nerve, representation is related here. And many governance systems, including boards, are structured around some form of representation. And controversial though it may be, we would say uh, that's not the way to get an optimal board composition. Rather, looking at what are the knowledge, skills, and experiences that people have that our organization needs and a clear list of what those are, and then mapping candidates based on what they bring talent wise as opposed to audience wise. Now, those don't have to be mutually exclusive. There's a lot more to unpack, but I want to name that as a thing. Uh, I'll keep moving here. Courage to change. You could say this is what is the risk appetite of the board or the board's commitment to boldness or new thinking. But no organization is operating in a vacuum. No organization can evade the pace of change happening in the world. And so no organization can remain static. We've got to have uh, dynamism, and boards set that tone. And that's related to the dynamic learning piece is what are we doing to learn along the way, to listen, to pay attention to data, qualitative and quantitative, and get better for it. Because that's so essential is to learn and get better. uh, just not acknowledging it can be difficult to get a diverse leadership, certainly. And that's part of why the research calling this out and us indexing on it is so important is because it happens only through intention and deliberate work. And not everyone agrees with this approach, but we want to underscore it. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving here. We also heard very clearly in the research that there are characteristics of a board with strategic agility that are key. And at strategic agility, the ability to flex and bend to meet the moment is at the heart of next level governance. And I won't go through all eight here, but you see some familiar themes around strategic leadership and innovation mindset, balancing risk, enterprise risk. So core things that we really need to work on developing and maintaining across boards to optimize performance. I also want to add in here that elements critical to the success of the board, and these are ranked in our research, and they happen to fall into three buckets around strategic leadership, unpacking that a bit more, roles, partnership, and understanding of roles. Want to stop for a minute on the partnership piece because we also find that so necessary and isn't always attended to as much as it needs to. There has to be a partnership between the board and certainly the CEO. And so the way that comes to life is with deliberate effort to build, in this case, also respect, candor, and trust in a partnership. Second bucket, professionalism and a leadership mentality. That's respect, candor, and trust comes up very strongly in that. And then third, process and tactics, they matter, but they're the third most important category based on the research. So using agenda setting and timing wisely is really key there. And one last piece from me before I pass to Mina. We also did research on what are the roles and responsibilities for ideal board. And so you see the data here, a strong emphasis on insight into the future of the industry, and guiding the long-term strategy of the organization based on that insight, making sure we've got candid conversation, healthy dialogue and debate, dealing with emerging issues. AI is a great one right now. You probably just rolled your eyes at me, but AI is a strategic level board conversation that's different than are you using Claude or Perplexity. But what's a board level? We talk about emerging issue. What are the implications? And how do we frame that conversation constructively? So lots to think about there, but I want to pass to Mina to keep us moving here. Mina?
Yep. Great. Thank you, John. We're going to move on to talk about, we've talked a lot about what it needs, the criteria needed, like who do you want to have on the board? How can they be qualified to lead the association in the right direction? Let's talk a little bit about what is needed, the things to do, or the structures and systems and the culture that needs to be in place to drive that high level of performance that is expected of modern association boards. Um, in McKinley's work on strategic agility for boards, we define it as the ability to improve performance and not just to be in Hugh, like we are at break-even point, or we're glad we're able to keep the lights on, even if barely, but really it is about thriving in the midst of disruption. And cliched as it may be, I will go back to what is it now, like 6-ish years ago, and COVID, and everybody feeling like, phew, like we got through this. Some of you may even be over sort of the negative impacts of that on your bottom line, on the business of the association as a whole. Um, but it isn't just about the one change, right? It's about knowing that, like AI, like other forces, there's constant disruption in our world, and how can we have a governance that will enable the organization to anticipate, to be really resilient, and to see opportunity in the midst of challenges and really be able to thrive. So, thriving is the key word here. Um, and in order to really strengthen the leadership um, on the board, it comes down to just to put it in a nutshell, for the purpose of this discussion here today, we see three things as being critical. We have talked a lot about getting the required knowledge, skills, and experience on the board, and I will just reiterate that some of the discussions that we've heard that where sort of legacy governance structures are willing to change is really to think about board position, recruiting, healthy recruitment, as somebody said in the chat for the board, um, being like hiring for a job, right? Like having the right job descriptions in place and thinking about what other knowledge, skills, and experience you need. Representation of your profession or industry matters, but what matters even more is the ability to look both at the mission and at the margin side. What does it take to really sustain the business of the association? Do you require somebody with marketing insights? Do you require someone with forecasting ability? Do you need people with deep insights into innovation and investment and kind of a startup culture? Like, it could be different for each of you, but really thinking about that as if you are hiring somebody to join your team, and then being able to appropriately get the right people in is is kind of foundational. It's a prerequisite really to be able to build on and drive that high performance. And then there's the systems and culture. We will talk more about that in a moment. You want to have the right kind of ecosystem in place to drive change, to drive innovation, to drive high performance. The culture matters. And that can be very subjective, right? Like we have worked with so many boards where they're like, something used to be broken or something wasn't working right, but we had an awesome chair in the last term who really was able to make a difference, and who was able to begin to make shifts in the culture of the board. That is wonderful, but how do you actually sustain that change, right? Like, so that it is not dependent on an individual who's a great leader, but so that the entire system is set to work and that does become the culture that you drive forward to. And this this looks so obvious. Several of you have been saying that's the in the chat that this is the reason you're here with us today is how do you what are the next practices? How do you lead a board to think about change and to really be innovative, to think outside the box, to be not just be content with the way things are currently. So that's all about being responsive to the external environment and thinking about what lies ahead. So we'll dive into each of these just a little bit more. This one I might gloss over quickly, just so we're not repetitive. Um, I will mention because I think this, we did talk about representation, and some of you were kind of pulling that thread in the chat. One problem that happens unfailingly when the board is more representative, whether that's representative of certain segment of the membership, whether it's geographic, regional, whatever it is. When people come onto the board from a certain segment, invariably, despite what the bylaws may say, despite what is reiterated at the beginning of every meeting, there is that internal conflict about, am I here to represent the interests of the group that elected me or because of which I am here, or am I here to think about the association as a whole? Even if you know that it's the latter, there is that internal struggle and that conflict. So that's I know that many volunteer leaders are able to think through this, process this, and actually come to a good place. But that is a challenge to name, and one of the sort of pitfall downsides, if you will, to a representative kind of leadership on the board. It's also really important in thinking about who's on the board. The board's often seen, for the right reasons, as it's prestigious to be on the board, right? Like the board holds all the authority, the power, um, which can be true, but um, the right kind of governance ecosystem can have different bodies working in close collaboration that fulfill different types of functions. It is not necessary for, we found at McKinley that it's not necessary for um, a board to be have representation, let's say, from every segment of the membership, let's say from early career, people from different specialties, people from different types of practice areas. They don't all have to be on the board for the board to necessarily hear all their voices. There could be other really strong listening channels through which members from different backgrounds and different settings and with different interests are able to provide their input and make their voices heard. And then it becomes the job of the board to use all that as input in making strategic discussions.
Mina, can I
Similarly,
can I
yeah, go
offer
ahead.
a quick anecdote? I was recently in a room where a couple CEOs were having a conversation around, and this is going to be probably controversial for some, but we so many groups have a version of an early career professional or a young practitioner seat on their board, and certainly understand that. But these CEOs were making the point that that is the inappropriate training ground for those folks. The organization should be committed to developing them as leaders and should certainly be understanding the perspectives of different career stages, including early careerists. But the training them by putting them on the board is a disservice to the board and a disservice to them. Now, I know there are going to be people who disagree with that, but I think it's a microcosm of this. There are some downsides to representation of certain identities, and are there other ways to attend to different communities? Um, anyway, just wanted to bring that anecdote forward because it was recent and lively.
Great. And the point, John, being that I'll just make this point and move on. We've pushed this one enough, but really, at the end of the day, it will be kind of impossible to represent everyone, right? And then there still won't be equity on the board. Okay. And there's also like a pipeline conversation here to continuously be thinking about not just this board or to be thinking about how can we get more people to run for election or like to be nominated, but um, to have sort of a long-term outlook. In fact, we have worked with some organizations where they've kind of transitioned from a nominating committee to more of a leadership development committee, which is thinking about what future leadership looks like and where do they come from. Okay, speaking about systems and culture, in the John talked about respect, candor, and trust, and very often when we are kind of researching why boards have run into difficult situations, it always comes back to like a communications gap. Um, you might think you're doing a good job, but really ensuring that all the systems are in place for a strong two-way communication channel, both for the board to hear from all of the right entities, the right people, in order to make the strategic decisions, ensuring that there are strong channels in place, and for board decisions to be communicated out in a thoughtful manner to all of the right people, again, through the right channels. Um, Not everything that happens in the boardroom obviously needs to get out of there, but really being able to provide, to communicate with the membership as a whole, with all of the stakeholders about why certain decisions were made, how it's going to impact them, and kind of the long-term vision and potential outcomes from those decisions. So to have that continuous process of strong communications is also key, and to have a good way to be able to have people, leaders on the board, be able to listen to members. We also have talked a lot about going back to the bicycle metaphor, really understanding what the board does and does not do, staying at that front wheel level, being able to stay out of the weeds and hold hold the organization, hold the leadership, hold staff accountable, but do that through the right at the right altitude. That becomes important as well. Um, Another sort of structural thing that we have found is, um, I mentioned this before, but when you know and understand the difference between what the board can do and what supporting entities that kind of are think of it as the board as the hub and others as the spokes, to continue that bicycle metaphor. But there could be bodies of experts, there could be committees, there could be representative entities there that to whom the board delegates or the organization delegates matters that require their expertise and their specialty, and they can in turn bring inputs, bring recommendations to the board, or be allowed to make decisions that are not related to the core business of the association that the board is driving. So knowing what that looks like for each of you and thinking about not just the board, but thinking about the ecosystem as a whole becomes really important. Um, I think I saw in the beginning many of you talk about how do we have more productive board meetings, right? That is the that is the eternal question. I have to say that I am at least heartened to see that many organizations, not every organization, many are have abandoned the practice of doing, you know, 200, 300, 500-page board books, whether they're in the form of slides or documents, or in some cases, even the printed binders. We see that getting a little bit better, but thinking more intentionally about a strong, generative, strategic focused agenda for the board, helping people come prepared, and especially avoiding a kind of legacy practice that might still linger for some organizations of having report outs at the board, of having it be sort of staff dominated, if you will, just by practice, and having the board having that tremendous expertise and leadership sit there in the room to passively listen to things is probably not a productive use of time either for the staff or for the board itself. So really thinking about how how the consent agenda can be consolidated and made more succinct so that there is time for generative discussions, and being able to tease out either where there is opportunity for growth, where there is a need for the organization to be outward facing, to look outside and draw in environmental factors to be responsive, allowing plenty of time in board meetings to have that kind of generative discussion, to not talk at the board, but to allow the board to really engage, and providing ample time and opportunity for that is just wonderful. I know some organizations on occasion will even bring in external facilitators and guest speakers to the board to really help set the stage. And sometimes, if you need that, especially to sort of make a shift from one way of operating to another, it is not a bad thing. It really is designed to draw the best out of all of the leadership there. Policies, norms, bylaws, financial and audit practices are all important, can be ignored, need to be in place. Nobody is required to memorize the bylaws, but they exist and they can serve as guardrails just to help the governance and the volunteer leaders remain focused on what they need to remain focused on and not kind of get into things that don't require their expertise. And we come to the big question: how do we prepare boards for change? As I just mentioned, I was recently working with one organization on their strategic planning, and at first the board was skeptical at us, the consultants, saying, "We've never had to use external help. We are the board. We know what is needed. We've always done the strategic plan ourselves." But after a couple of months, there was a complete change in that outlook because they realized the tremendous value of being able to draw in external perspectives. And this was not just members, but of being able to talk to stakeholders, to other associations in the space, to for-profit entities, to um, all kinds of organizations that had interacted or that were in the same space as this association was, and to really be able to get their perspective and know what they were, not only how they perceived this association's role, but to also think about what was happening in the environment and trends that they needed to take note of, really is helping them develop a more robust strategic plan. So, in the same way, thinking about a board that is not just looking at what the association is already doing, but that is really able to draw from multiple sources. Look at what is happening in the field, rely on forecasts, rely on future focused trends. I will repeat the ASAE foresight works kind of resources and inputs are really, really important. And to think about, it's really important to help boards to encourage the leadership of the board to not just accept status quo, right? Like we're doing well. We are at break even. Membership is strong. Like we're doing as well as we've ever done, or even if there've been minor slips, not a huge concern. Um, I think becoming complacent is probably the biggest challenge. So to be able to think not just about what is happening today, but about what could change tomorrow, right? Like what are these negative factors? An example is that I hear a number of boards talking about how to bring newer generations entering the workforce into membership. And that's a very different conversation than just how do we engage members because um, today's generation thinks very differently, has very different preferences. And the fact that your membership is strong today doesn't mean that it will be tomorrow, right? So, thinking about issues like that, being able to anticipate and being able to have discussions around what needs to change in the organization to to be able to be responsive to these emerging trends is really important. And as John mentioned before, to really have plenty of time for generative thinking, um, is important as well on the agenda. And once sort of the board um, accepts or aligns on the need for change, it's not going to be easy to get that message through to everybody that's involved and will be impacted. It really is about then taking on the role of champions of change and helping change to be accepted throughout the organization. That becomes very important as well. And boards need to uh, understand and align on what their risk posture is. Lots of times you're looking at changes in a business model, you're looking at doing something innovative in response to these changes in the environment. And that means there will be a certain amount of risk that needs to be taken. So, risk needs to be informed, but unless boards are open to piloting, to trying new things, or just to look at different ways of being, um, it is not going to be possible to survive and thrive in the midst of disruption. And around specific topics, what are some generative questions you can ask your board to be thinking about? It really is looking at how the market is evolving, what are the gaps and opportunities, and what are the pain points that your members and beyond members, your customers, your prospects, that bigger universe out there, what is really keeping them up at night, and what can you do to solve the problems that they're facing? That needs to be a constant question. And when we say business model, it really talk. We at McKinley have done extensive work on it, and it really involves looking at um, everything from the membership model to the ways in which the association is bringing in revenue to thinking about your reach, your audience, and how you build community. So, looking at the core strengths of the association, but with an expanded perspective, becomes important. And by constantly surfacing these questions, putting them on the agenda, it is possible to get the board to think not just about are we just evaluating performance here, but to really think about how do we sustain organizations into the future. John, anything to add there on that generative thinking?
Yeah, I would say, when you look at the questions, you might think, well, those are pretty ordinary questions, but really unpacking them, really looking around the corners on where your industry is headed and understanding the implications for people in the field or discipline or area of focus, um, that's work. There's a lot of layers to that. So don't be fooled by the simplicity of the list of questions, really unpacking them in a rigorous way is going to take work and it's going to take time and it's going to take dedication. Boy, is it going to be powerful for the board to engage in those conversations.
Thank you. So, with that, we will stop talking at you and use our remaining few minutes to hear back from you. I'm going to skip that. And we have one more poll about your board's openness to change. So, if we can pop that up, we'd love to hear what you're thinking and what your needs are.
While folks are answering, I will just engage with you, Mina, for a second. We know that engaging in governance work, we oftentimes say it's the third rail of associations, or it's not for the faint of heart. It's big and complex and can be all consuming. Um, But we hope that conversations like this help to deconstruct it and you can sort of take a piece at a time or whatever is the right way to approach it for your organization and get into it, um, in a thoughtful, planful way. We know it's big, but we also know it's doable. And there's lots of evidence of improvement along the way. Let's see what the poll said.
This is actually very, very heartening to see that the majority of you, 50% of you, think your boards recognize the need for change, but are not quite sure of how to proceed. Um, and that is a tremendous first step, recognizing the need. And as John said, there's so many pieces of the puzzle that need to be put together, but they could be taken one at a time, knowing that making change happen is a phased process and it takes a structural and cultural change. That's important. And then also great to see that almost an equal number, 43% of you, think that your boards are open to continuous change and innovation and are prepared to take informed risks for growth. Um, Congratulations on getting there, and we hope that that is going to produce great results for you. And we do know that there is a small percentage that remain loyal to legacy systems. So hopefully you can take away some ideas about where to start to begin to change that culture as needed. So just want to thank you all for sticking with us through the hour. I will just mention that McKinley recently has created some on-demand training that you can, through a subscription model, if you are looking for how to onboard board members on a continuous basis, help help your leadership think a little bit differently about volunteer leadership, think a little bit differently about how they should approach change. There's some great content created by all of us that work with boards on a regular basis that is available to you. And within that, there's some opportunities for customization as well. So if you are interested, we'd be happy to tell you more, or you can just scan this QR code and find out where to go. But let me stop there and see if there are any questions. John, is there anything in the chat you've been watching that you want to pull out?
Yeah, I appreciate the points in there around there's a number of places to go for resources and insights, and we certainly encourage that. And we know it's hard, but what we would say is just take a step. Um, and begin somewhere. It almost in every instance ends up being a longer process, multi-year, multi-phase. Um, but there are things you can probably move forward on more quickly, and others that are going to be more complex and take time. So give yourself the patience. Happy to help you in whatever ways, but just it's easy to get stuck in the overwhelm of there's so many layers to this and there's so much sort of politics and emotion around it. There is. We need to acknowledge that. And that doesn't mean it's unapproachable or undoable. Hang in there. Closing thoughts, Mina, from you?
Um, yes, that I think it's encouraging. I feel like we have really come a long way from the legacy days of, you know, it's kind of business as usual. We are really excited to see more and more organizations trying to get together that strong leadership and that strong partnership, especially between the executive team, between the staff, and between volunteer leaders who are giving of their time, talent, and treasure here to really build strong organizations. And I would just say there's so much potential out there for associations to be many things to many people, to reach new audiences that you haven't before. And when you have a strong governance, you are really empowered and motivated to go for it. So
Thank you,
good luck.
Mina. As always, a great partnership. And thank you all for attending. And we'll see you down the road.